I never expected to wake up 30 years after my murder, but here I am. My name was Sarah Chen, and in 1995 my husband James and my best friend Elena stabbed me in our kitchen while I was 6 months pregnant. They thought they got away with it. They were wrong. Now I'm Mira Shah, young, successful, and armed with memories of a past life that haunts my every waking moment. When I saw them at the art gallery last week, my blood ran cold. Elena, now Cora Williams, still wears that same predatory smile. James, now Marcus Pierce, still has those cold eyes that watched me die. They're married to other people, but already I see the signs. They're falling into the same patterns, destroying new lives while carrying on their affair. I could walk away. I could let them rot in their toxic love. But when I discovered they'd killed others after me, I knew I had to stop them. What I didn't expect was to meet David Laurent, a sculptor whose gentle soul makes me question everything about my mission of vengeance. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I have a choice. Pursue the justice I've craved for 3 decades, or embrace the unexpected gift of real love. But with Elena and James remembering who I am, time is running out. They're coming for me again, and this time I'm ready. Before we begin this journey of revenge, love, and second chances, buckle up, get ready, and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. I died with my hands pressed against my pregnant belly, trying to protect my unborn child as my husband James plunged the knife into my chest. My best friend Elena stood in our kitchen doorway, watching with those cold eyes I'd never seen before that moment. The blade felt like ice, then fire, then nothing at all. When I jerked awake screaming, the silk sheets tangled around my legs felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. The massive bedroom with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking San Francisco Bay wasn't mine. The long dark hair that fell past my shoulders wasn't mine. The smooth brown skin of my hands wasn't mine. But the memories, both sets of them, were definitely mine. I stumbled to the ensuite bathroom, gripping the marble counter as I stared at my reflection. Gone was Sarah Chen's delicate features and pale complexion. Instead, Mira Shah's face looked back at me. High cheekbones and full lips, eyes so dark they were almost black. I was younger now, maybe 28. My fingers traced the spot where the knife had entered, but found only smooth skin. I knew who I was, both of me. Sarah Chen, murdered in 1995 at 32, and Mira Shah, tech CEO and founder of an AI security company in 2025. 2 complete sets of memories existed in my mind, but only one felt real right now, the one that ended in blood and betrayal. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. 3 missed calls from my assistant and a calendar reminder about the board meeting in 2 hours. Mira Shah's life didn't stop just because Sarah Chen's memories had come crashing back. I forced myself through the motions of getting ready, shower, makeup, sleek black pantsuit. My hands shook as I fastened my earrings. The drive to my office in the financial district was surreal. 30 years had passed since my death, but I remembered everything with crystal clarity. The way Elena had smiled at me that morning, helping me pick out a maternity dress for the gallery opening. How James had kissed me goodbye, his lips still wearing traces of Elena's lipstick that I'd been too trusting to notice. The sound of their whispered conversation in the kitchen when they thought I was napping. The look they shared just before the knife came down. My assistant Curtis met me at the elevator with a coffee and tablet in hand. The Peterson account numbers came in, and legal needs your sign-off on the new security protocols. Also, there's an invitation from the Hayes Gallery for their opening next week. Very exclusive, could be good for networking. I nearly dropped my coffee. The Hayes Gallery, Elena's gallery, where everything had started falling apart in my past life. What were the odds? I pulled up the invitation on my tablet with trembling fingers. There, listed as the gallery's new owner and curator, Cora Williams. My heart stopped. The face in the professional headshot was different, but those eyes, I'd never forget those eyes. Elena was here too, reborn just like me. And if Elena was here, then James. Miss Shah, are you all right? You've gone pale. I forced a smile. Fine, Curtis. Just remembered something important. Clear my schedule for the gallery opening. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The board meeting passed in a blur. I answered questions about quarterly projections and market expansion on autopilot while my mind raced. Was this why I'd been reborn? To find them? To stop them before they destroyed more lives? Or was this some cosmic joke, forcing me to relive my worst nightmare? That evening, I did what I should have done 30 years ago. I investigated. Money opened doors that had been closed to Sarah Chen, the struggling gallery owner. Mira Shah's resources and connections gave me access to databases, records, social media. Within hours, I had found them both. Cora Williams, born 1997, grew up in Connecticut, graduated from Yale with an art history degree. Now owner of the Hayes Gallery, recently divorced, no children. The photos showed Elena's familiar, calculating ambition behind a new face. Marcus Pierce, born 1995, investment banker turned venture venture capitalist, married to Claire Pierce née Taylor, currently living in Pacific Heights, just 3 miles from my penthouse. Different face, different name, but the same James who had held me while I bled out on our kitchen floor. They had found each other again, inevitably drawn together like poisonous magnets. I watched through social media as their posts and photos overlapped more frequently over the past year. Gallery openings, charity events, business meetings, always with plausible deniability, always with that undercurrent I recognized too well. Claire Pierce's Instagram showed a beautiful woman with kind eyes, unconsciously posting the evidence of her husband's growing distance, just like I had done all those years ago. I spent hours scrolling through their lives, watching the familiar pattern emerge, the late nights at the gallery, the business dinners, the casual touches captured in event photos. My hands clenched into fists as I saw Elena, Cora, posting friendly selfies with Claire, playing the supportive friend while circling closer to her prey. A notification popped up. Curtis had sent the RSVP for the gallery opening. In 1 week, I would see them face to face. Would they recognize me the way I had recognized them? Did they remember our past life? Or was I alone with these haunting memories? I closed my laptop and walked to the window, watching the fog roll in over the bay. Sarah Chen had been too trusting, too willing to explain away the signs. She had died believing in the goodness of others until the very end, but I wasn't just Sarah anymore. Mira Shah was nobody's victim. My phone lit up with another message from Curtis. The background check I'd requested on Marcus Pierce had arrived. I opened the file and started reading, my jaw tightening with each page. James hadn't changed. Not really. 3 failed marriages before Claire. Multiple SEC investigations that had been quietly closed. Former business partners who had mysteriously lost everything. A pattern emerged. And Elena, Cora, was there too, appearing in city after city just before each disaster. They had been doing this for years, destroying lives together. My death hadn't been enough for them. They had turned destruction into an art form. I walked to my home office and opened the hidden wall safe. Inside was a small red notebook where Mira Shah had been documenting certain irregularities in the artwork. Now Sarah Chen's knowledge of gallery operations merged with Mira's tech expertise, and I began to see the bigger picture, the art fraud, the money laundering, the careful web of destruction they had woven. The sun was rising by the time I finished my notes. I hadn't slept, but I felt more awake than I had in either lifetime. They thought they had gotten away with murder. They thought they could keep playing their games forever. But they had never faced an opponent who knew all their moves before they made them. I opened my closet and selected a dress for the gallery opening, blood red, like the one I had been wearing when I died. This time would be different. This time, I would be ready. Let them play their games. Let them think they were the predators. They had no idea what was coming for them. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I called Curtis. I need you to set up a meeting with David Laurent, the sculptor doing the centerpiece for the Hayes Gallery opening. If anyone knew what was really happening behind the scenes at Elena's gallery, it would be the artists themselves. As I hung up, my hand drifted to my stomach, remembering the child I had lost, the innocent life they had taken without a second thought. Justice wasn't enough anymore. They needed to pay for everything they had done in both lifetimes, and I would be the one to make sure since my death. The industrial warehouse space had been transformed into a sleek temple of contemporary art, all polished concrete and strategic lighting. But the moment I walked through those glass doors, the memories hit me like a physical force. This was where Elena had first introduced me to James, where she had watched us fall in love while plotting our destruction. I adjusted my red dress and accepted a champagne flute from a passing server. The opening didn't start for another hour, but the space was already filling with San Francisco's elite. My eyes swept the room, cataloging faces until I found her. Elena, now Cora, stood by her office door, holding court with a group of patrons. She wore a black designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her new face animated as she gestured toward a massive sculpture. "Miss Shah? I'm David Laurent. Your assistant said you wanted to discuss my installation." I turned to find a tall man with kind eyes and paint-stained hands that seemed at odds with his formal suit, the sculptor I'd arranged to meet. "Call me Mira. I've been following your work with great interest. Have you?" I wasn't aware tech executives were into experimental sculpture. "I contain multitudes," I said, leading him toward his piece. "Tell me about your experience working with the Hayes Gallery." With Cora, his expression flickered. "She's professionally ruthless, but that's the art world, isn't it?" Before I could probe further, a familiar laugh cut through the growing crowd. James, Marcus now, had arrived. He moved through the space like he owned it, stopping to kiss Cora's cheek with lingering familiarity. Behind him, Claire Pierce entered more hesitantly. looking beautiful and lost in a pale blue dress. My hand tightened on my champagne flute. Claire was me, 30 years ago. The same trusting smile, the same willful blindness to her husband's wandering attention. I watched Cora embrace her warmly, playing the role of supportive friend perfectly. "Are you all right?" David asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Several," I thought. "I'm fine. Tell me more about your sculpture. What inspired the piece?" As David spoke about his work, I observed the room's dynamic. Cora kept Claire close, orchestrating introductions to potential clients while Marcus worked the crowd. Every few minutes, his eyes would find Cora, that same heated look I remembered from my past life. "Miss Shaw?" A new voice interrupted. I turned to find Claire Pierce herself, Cora at her side. "I'm Claire Pierce. Cora says you're interested in becoming a patron of the gallery. Please, call me Mira." I shook her hand, noting how Cora watched our interaction with calculated interest. "Your husband's firm handles some of our company's investments, doesn't it? Marcus speaks very highly of your work in AI security," Cora said smoothly. "We should all have dinner soon, get to know each other better." The irony nearly made me laugh. Instead, I smiled. "I'd love that, Claire. Has Cora shown you the new Rothco acquisition? I'd love your perspective on it." I guided Claire away from Cora, watching the latter's carefully concealed annoyance. For the next hour, I kept Claire engaged in conversation, disrupting whatever plans Cora had for the evening. It was petty, perhaps, but deeply satisfying. Marcus finally approached as the crowd reached its peak. "Mind if I steal my wife away?" His new face was handsome, but his eyes were the same, cold, calculated, empty. "Of course not." I met his gaze steadily. "We were just discussing the gallery's remarkable transformation under Cora's leadership. Such a gift for spotting opportunities, wouldn't you agree?" Something flickered in his expression. Recognition? Suspicion? But Claire was already taking his arm, letting him lead her away. I watched them go, noting how his free hand brushed Cora's waist as they passed. "Fascinating dynamics," David commented, rejoining me. "Like watching a complex dance where half the steps are hidden." "You have no idea," I murmured. "How long have you known Cora?" "About a year, since she bought the gallery." He hesitated. "Look, I probably shouldn't say this, but be careful with her. People who get too close to Cora Williams tend to get burned. If he only knew." Speaking from experience, let's just say I've seen enough to know something isn't right here. The way artwork appears and disappears, the convenient accidents that befall her competitors, the missing provenance documentation. Now we were getting somewhere. "I'd love to hear more about that, perhaps over dinner." He smiled, surprised but pleased. "I'd like that. Though I warn you, shop talk about art fraud conspiracies isn't typical first date material." "I'm not typical," I said, just as commotion erupted near Cora's office. Claire Pierce stood in the doorway, face pale, phone in hand. Marcus rushed to her side, but not before I glimpsed what had upset her, a text message thread on her screen, partially visible. Marcus and Cora's intimate exchanges, their planned rendezvous, their secret life exposed. History repeating itself, right on schedule. Cora took control immediately, ushering Claire into the office while Marcus made excuses to the curious onlookers. I remembered this too, the private confrontations, the tearful explanations, the careful manipulation until the victim doubted their own reality. "I should go," David said awkwardly. "But about dinner?" I gave him my card, my eyes still on the office door. "Call me tomorrow. And David, thank you for being honest about your concern." After he left, I positioned myself near the office, straining to hear the muffled voices inside. Cora's soothing tone, Marcus's practiced denials, Claire's breaking heart. My phone buzzed. Curtis had sent the preliminary findings from my investigation into the gallery's finance. Multiple shell companies, suspicious transactions, artwork with suspiciously convenient documentation. Elena's methods hadn't changed, just evolved with the time. I moved through the thinning crowd, gathering snippets of gossip. Apparently, this wasn't the first time Marcus's infidelity had caused a scene. 3 previous wives, 3 similar scandals, 3 lives destroyed. And Cora had been there each time, the constant shadow in Marcus's destructive wake. "Quite a dramatic evening," Cora's voice came from behind me. "I hope it hasn't soured your interest in the gallery." I turned to face my murderer. "On the contrary, I find myself more intrigued than ever." "Wonderful! Though I must admit, I'm curious about your sudden interest in art investment. Your company's focus seems quite different." "People can surprise you," I said softly. "They're rarely exactly what they seem." Something sharp flashed in her eyes, recognition, fear, but her smile never wavered. How philosophical. "We should continue this conversation soon, perhaps at that dinner we discussed." "I look forward to it." I held her gaze a moment longer than necessary, letting her see the challenge there. As I left the gallery, I glimpsed Marcus and Claire leaving separately, her into a waiting Uber, him lingering behind to speak with Cora. Just like before, they thought they were being subtle. Just like before, they had no idea they were being watched. Back home, I added the evening's observations to my growing file. Patterns emerged, their methods, their weaknesses, their inevitable mistakes. They thought they were clever. These reborn predators, they thought no one could touch them. But I had something they didn't, the memory of how their story ended last time, and this time I would write a very different ending. My phone lit up with a text from David. "Dinner tomorrow? I promise to keep the art fraud conspiracy theories to a minimum." I smiled, remembering his kind eyes and honest warnings, an unexpected variable in my carefully planned revenge. But perhaps that's exactly what I needed. Someone who saw through Cora's facade without knowing the full truth. Outside my window, fog rolled in from the bay, shrouding the city in mystery. Somewhere out there, Claire Pierce was crying in an empty house, just beginning to understand the depth of her husband's betrayal. Somewhere, Marcus and Cora were celebrating another successful manipulation, never suspecting that their past had come back to haunt them. I touched the spot where the knife had entered 30 years ago, feeling my heartbeat strong and steady beneath my fingers. They had taken everything from me in my past life. This time I would take everything from them. First, I needed to verify David's claims about the art fraud. If Cora was as careless with her criminal enterprises as she had been with her affairs, those records would lead me straight to every skeleton in her closet. And Marcus's financial dealings would provide the leverage I needed to make them destroy each other. I opened my laptop and began to plan the next phase. The gallery opening was just the beginning. Soon they would learn what it felt like to be the prey instead of the predators. Every morning for a week, I woke up hoping it had all been a nightmare. Every morning, reality hit harder than before. I wasn't just Mira Shaw anymore. I was Sarah Chen's vengeance incarnate, into Elena and James's past started with their previous victims. 3 hours into searching financial records, I found the first one, Rebecca Martinez, James's second wife before Claire. She had owned a successful chain of boutiques until a series of suspicious accidents and fraud allegations destroyed her business. The timing coincided perfectly with Elena's arrival in Los Angeles as an art consultant. The pattern repeated with Catherine Winters in Chicago and Michelle Chen in Seattle. Each time, James married a successful woman. Each time, Elena appeared in their social circle. Each time, destruction followed, but they had gotten sloppy, confident. The trail they left was clear if you knew where to look. I was compiling the evidence when David called. "Still up for dinner? I found a quiet place where we can talk without being overheard." "Perfect. Send me the address." The restaurant was a small Italian place in North Beach, far from the gallery scene. David had already claimed a corner table when I arrived. He stood as I approached, pulling out my chair with an old-world courtesy that caught me off guard. "I've been thinking about what you asked at the gallery," he said once we had ordered. "About Cora and the missing artwork. It's not just paperwork irregularities. Pieces disappear and reappear with different provenances. Authentication documents change, and anyone who asks too many questions has accidents." I leaned forward. "Tell me about the accidents." My friend Thomas was a restoration expert. He noticed discrepancies in some of the gallery's recent acquisitions. 2 days later, his studio burned down with all his records inside. The fire department called it faulty wiring. And Thomas took a job in New York, far away from Cora Williams and her perfect paper trail. David studied me over his wine glass. "Why are you really interested in all this? You're not just a potential investor, are you?" I considered my words carefully. "Let's say I have personal reasons for wanting to understand exactly what Cora and Marcus Pierce are capable of." "Marcus Pierce, the venture capitalist?" His eyes widened. "Of course. The gallery's sudden financial turnaround last year. Everyone wondered where the money came from. Money laundering through art sales is an old trick, but they've refined it to an art form." I pulled out my phone and showed him the financial record. "See these transactions? Shell companies moving millions through artwork that only exists on paper." David whistled soft. "This is bigger than I thought. But why are you investigating them? What's your stake in this?" The truth hovered on my lips. In my past life, I'd kept too many secrets. Look where that had gotten me. They hurt someone I cared about, someone who trusted them. I'm making sure it doesn't happen again. His hand covered mine briefly. "Be careful. People who cross Cora tend to regret it. If he only knew. I can handle Cora Williams. It's Marcus Pierce I'm worried about." "His current wife, Claire? She reminds me of someone I used to know." "The woman from the gallery opening? The one who found the text messages?" David shook his head. "That was ugly. But she's still with him, according to the gossip. Cora convinced her it was all a misunderstanding." "Of course she did. The same way Elena had convinced me 30 years ago that James's late nights at the office were just work, that the lipstick on his collar was from an innocent hug, that her constant presence in our lives was just friendship." Our food arrived, and conversation shifted to lighter topics. David told me about his sculpture work, his passion for creating beauty from broken things. I found myself laughing at his stories, genuinely enjoying his company in a way I hadn't expected. You should come to my studio sometime, he said as we finished our wine. See how the piece for the gallery is coming along. Though I warn you, it's not exactly a formal setting. I'd like that. The words surprised me. This wasn't part of my plan. David was supposed to be a source of information, nothing more. But something about his honest eyes and gentle hands made me want to trust. The next morning, I dove back into my investigation with renewed focus. Curtis had compiled dossiers on everyone in Elena and James's current circle. The pattern was clear. They targeted successful women, preferably those with complicated family situations or few close friends. Claire Pierce fit the profile perfectly. I was reviewing the files when my phone buzzed with a text from Claire herself. Can we meet? Somewhere private. I need to talk to someone who isn't involved. Perfect. Of course. There's a cafe near my office. 1 hour? She was already there when I arrived, fidgeting with her wedding ring. Thank you for meeting me. I know, we barely know each other, but there's something about you. You seem trustworthy. If she only knew. What's wrong, Claire? It's Marcus and Cora. They explained away the text messages, but something feels wrong. The way they look at each other when they think no one's watching. The late-night gallery meetings. Am I going crazy? You're not crazy. I covered her hand with mine, remembering how it felt to be in her position. Trust your instincts. There's more. She lowered her voice. I found financial documents in Marcus's office. Large transfers to offshore accounts, all connected to art purchases through the gallery. When I asked him about it, he got angry. Said I was imagining things, just like James had gotten angry when I asked about the strange phone calls, when I questioned the missing money from our accounts, when I mentioned Elena's constant presence in our home. Claire, listen to me carefully. I need you to gather every document you can find. Bank statements, emails, anything suspicious. Can you do that without Marcus knowing? She nodded, determination replacing fear in her eye. I already started. After the gallery opening, I made copies of everything in his home office. It's all on a flash drive in my safe deposit box. Smart girl. Smarter than I had been. Good. Keep it there. And Claire, be careful. Don't confront them again. Just watch and document everything. After she left, I called David. Still want to show me your studio? His workspace was a converted warehouse in the dog patch, full of half-finished sculptures and the smell of metal and stone. The piece for the gallery dominated the center space, a twisted mass of steel and glass that somehow captured both beauty and violence. It's about transformation, he explained, running his hands over the rough edges. The moment when something broken becomes something new. I touched the sculpture's surface, feeling the sharp edges beneath the smooth exterior, like a phoenix rising from ashes. Exactly. He watched me explore the piece. You understand it. Most people just see the chaos. I understand more than you know. I turned to face him. David, what if I told you I know exactly what Cora and Marcus are capable of? That I've seen firsthand what they do to people who trust them. He stepped closer, his expression serious. I'd say you should tell me everything, and then we should figure out how to stop them. So I told him. Not everything, not about my past life or my death, but enough. About the pattern of destruction I'd uncovered. About Claire and the other wives. About the art fraud and money laundering operation that was just the tip of their criminal empire. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. You're going after them, aren't you? That's why you're gathering evidence. They need to be stopped before they destroy more lives. It's dangerous. He touched my face gently. Let me help. I know the art world, the players involved, and I care about what happens to you. The touch of his hand sent electricity through my skin. This wasn't part of my plan. David wasn't supposed to matter. But standing in his studio, surrounded by beauty born from broken things, I felt something I hadn't experienced in either lifetime. Hope. Okay, I said softly. But we do this carefully. They're more dangerous than you know. We'll be careful. He smiled, and for the first time since I'd awakened with my past life's memories, I felt truly alive. Now, let me show you how this sculpture comes together. It's all about finding the right balance between strength and vulnerability. As he guided my hands over the metal and glass, teaching me how to see the beauty in broken pieces, I realized something important. Revenge wasn't enough anymore. I needed to build something new from the ashes of my past life. Something stronger, something real. But first I had to make sure Elena and James couldn't hurt anyone else. And thanks to Claire's evidence and David's insider knowledge, I finally had everything I needed to bring their empire crashing down. The Hayes Gallery was quiet when I arrived for my meeting with Cora. Too quiet. The click of my heels echoed through the empty space as her assistant led me to her office. I had dressed carefully for this moment, choosing a white suit that made me look both wealthy and dangerous. Mira, darling. Cora rose from behind her desk, all elegant lines and practiced warmth. I'm so pleased you're interested in becoming an investor. The gallery could benefit from someone with your business acumen and financial resources. I settled into the chair across from her, crossing my legs deliberately. Let's be direct, Cora. We both know the gallery needs a significant cash. I prefer to think of it as an opportunity for growth. Marcus speaks very highly of your business instincts. Of course he did. I'd made sure rumors of my company's success had reached him. Speaking of Marcus, how is Claire? I haven't seen her since the opening. She's fine. Just a minor misunderstanding, all resolved now. Cora waved her hand dismissively. Shall we discuss numbers? I pulled out my tablet, watching her reaction as I displayed the financial documents I'd compiled. These numbers are particularly interesting. The Rothko sale last quarter, for instance. Impressive profits for a piece that technically never existed. The color drained from her face. I'm not sure what you're implying. No implications, just fact. Like the fact that your authentication paperwork shows remarkable similarities to other forgeries that have appeared in galleries across the country. Always in cities where you and Marcus had business interests. She recovered quickly. I had to give her that. These are serious accusations, Miss Shah. The kind that could damage reputations if made public, including yours. Threats already? I expected more finesse. I leaned forward. Here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna accept my investment. I'll own 40% of the gallery. And in return, I won't share these documents with the FBI's art crime team. Cora's eyes narrowed. You've done your homework, but you don't know what you're getting into. If she only knew. On the contrary, I know exactly what I'm doing. Do we have a deal? She studied me for a long moment before nodding. Draw up the paperwork. But remember, Mira, partners share responsibility for everything that happens in their business. The threat was clear, but I just smiled. I'm counting on it. That evening, I met David at his studio. He was working late on the gallery sculpture, his hands covered in metal dust. How did it go? She took the bait. I settled onto his workbench, watching him shape the metal. She'll try to implicate me in their schemes, of course, but that's part of the plan. He set down his tools and faced me. Are you sure about this? Getting close to them is dangerous. I need to be on the inside to gather evidence. And speaking of evidence, I pulled out my phone. Claire sent me something interesting. Bank transfers linking Marcus to 3 suspicious deaths. Former business partners who knew too much. David's expression darkened. They're not just fraudsters, they're killers. Yes, I didn't tell him how intimately I knew that truth, which is why we need to be careful. Claire is already in danger. She knows too much. He moved closer, his hand finding mine. You're in danger too. The way you look at them sometimes like you know their darkest secrets. They'll notice eventually. I squeezed his hand, surprised by how natural it felt. I can handle them, but I need you to do something for me. The sculpture for the gallery opening, can you modify it? How? I explained my idea, watching his eyes light up with understanding. It's perfect, hidden in plain sight. But Mira, he pulled me closer. There's something I need to tell you first. My heart raced at his proximity. This wasn't part of the plan. David was supposed to be an ally, nothing more. But the way he looked at me made me forget about revenge for a moment. I'm falling for you, he said softly. And it terrifies me because I know you're walking into a trap with these people. Let me help more. Let me protect you. I touched his face, feeling the roughness of stubble under my fingers. David, my phone buzzed, shattering the moment. A text from Claire. Marcus knows about the flash drive. Need help. I have to go. I grabbed my purse. Claire's in trouble. David caught my arm. Not alone. I'm coming with you. We found Claire at a small hotel near the airport, shaking but alive. He went crazy when he found out I'd copied the files, she said. Started throwing things, screaming about betrayal. If Cora hadn't called him, of course, Helena always knew how to control James's rages. Did he follow you? I don't think so. I used cash, left my phone at home. Claire hugged herself. What do I do now? You disappear. I handed her an envelope. New identity, tickets to London, enough cash to start over. My security team will escort you. She stared at me. You planned for this. Who are you really? Someone who knows exactly what they're capable of. I helped her pack her few belongings. The security team will be here in 20 minutes. Use the time to write down everything you remember about Marcus's business dealing, everything he ever told you about the past. After Claire was safely away with my security team, David drove me home. That was impressive. Scary, but impressive. You really did plan for everything. Almost everything. I hadn't planned for him. For the way he made me feel human again. David, about what you said in the studio. He parked outside my building. You don't have to say anything. I know your mission comes first. Number. I turned to face him. That's just it. For the first time for the first time in a long time, something else matters more. He kissed me then, gentle but insistent, and I let myself forget about revenge for a moment. Let myself remember what it felt like to be truly alive. The next morning, Cora was waiting in my office. Claire's gone. Marcus is livid. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Should I? I met her gaze steadily. I'm just your new business partner, remember? Cut the act. She leaned forward. Who are you really? What's your connection to all this? I smiled, channeling her own predatory expression back at her. Careful, Cora. You're starting to sound paranoid. Bad for business. She left without another word, but I knew the game had changed. They were watching me now, looking for weaknesses. Let them look, David called as I was leaving the office. The sculpture's ready. Want to see what revenge looks like in steel and glass? I did, but first, I had other plans to set in motion. The evidence Claire had gathered would destroy Marcus's business empire. My own investigation had uncovered even more of their crimes, but it wasn't enough. I needed them to destroy each other. And thanks to David's sculpture, I knew exactly how to make that happen. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about violence or exposure. Sometimes it's about showing people exactly who they really are in a way they can't deny. I touched the spot where the knife had entered 30 years ago. Soon, very soon, Elena and James would face their own reflection, and this time they wouldn't be able to look away. The dinner party was Cora's idea, a small gathering to celebrate our new partnership, she said. Just a few key players in the art world, plus Marcus, of course. I knew it was a trap, but I accepted anyway. Sometimes the best way to spring a trap is to walk right into it. I wore red again, the same shade I'd dyed in. David insisted on being my +1 despite my protest. "I'm not letting you face them alone," he said as we pulled up to Cora's Pacific Heights mansion. Not after what happened to Claire. The house was exactly what I expected. Modern art on every wall, each piece carefully chosen to display wealth and taste. Elena's aesthetic hadn't changed, even if her face had. Marcus was already there, drink in hand, watching me with predatory interest as Cora made introductions to the other guests. "Mira Shah, my newest partner," she announced to the small group of collectors and critics. "Her investment will take the Hayes Gallery in exciting new directions." "I'm certainly hoping for some surprises," I said, meeting her eye. The double meaning wasn't lost on her. Dinner was a masterpiece of passive aggression. Cora had seated me between Marcus and a prominent art critic, with David across the table. The conversation flowed like the expensive wine, all subtle barbs and hidden meaning. "Tell us about your background in art, Mira," the critic asked. "It seems an unusual interest for a tech executive." "I learned from someone very special to me," I said. "She had an eye for beauty and for deception." Marcus's hand tightened on his wine glass. "Deception is such an ugly word. Art is about interpretation, isn't it, Cora?" Among other things. Cora's smile was razor sharp, like loyalty, trust, things that seem to be in short supply lately. Speaking of trust, I took a deliberate sip of wine. I heard the most fascinating story about a gallery in Chicago, a series of forged masterpieces, a mysterious fire. Ring any bells? The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. David's hand found mine under the table, squeezing in warning. "I try not to pay attention to industry gossip," Cora said smoothly. "Though I did hear something interesting about you, Mira. Your company's sudden success, the mysterious source of your initial funding. My past is an open book," I met her gaze. "Unlike some people's." Marcus cleared his throat. "Speaking of books, Claire left quite a collection behind. Any idea where she might have gone, Mira?" "None at all, though I'm sure she had her reasons for leaving so suddenly." The critic looked confused. "Claire Pierce? Your wife, Marcus? What happened?" "A personal matter," Marcus said curtly. "Nothing worth discussing." But I could see the rage building behind his eyes. The same rage I'd seen 30 years ago, when he realized I knew about him and Elena. Some patterns never change. After dinner, Cora insisted on showing me her private gallery. As soon as the door closed behind us, her mask dropped. "Excuse me? Not your face, but something about you. The way you move, the way you watch us. We've met before, haven't we?" I forced a laugh. "I think I'd remember." "Would you?" She moved closer. "Like Marcus remembers? Like I remember?" The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken truths. "What exactly are you saying, Cora?" "You know exactly what I'm saying, Sarah." The name hit me like a physical blow. She remembered. She knew who I was. All my careful plans, my subtle manipulations, meant nothing now. "Impossible," I whispered. "Is it?" "When Marcus and I found each other again, we knew." The memories came back slowly at first, then all at once. Her smile was cruel. "We wondered if you'd come back too, if you'd try to interfere again." "Again?" I fought to keep my voice steady. "You murdered me! We freed ourselves from you, from your neediness, your trust, your perfect little life." She circled me slowly. "And now here you are, playing the same games. Did you think we wouldn't notice? Did you think you could turn us against each other?" The door opened. Marcus stood there, his expression dark. "I told you it was her. I could feel it." "How long have you known?" I asked. "Since the gallery opening." "Something about the way you looked at Claire, like you were seeing a ghost." He moved into the room, closing the door behind him. "We should have known you'd come back to haunt us." "Haunt you?" I laughed, real amusement mixing with fear. "I'm going to destroy you, both of you." "With what?" Cora's voice was silk over steel. "Your evidence? Your careful investigation? Do you really think we'd leave a trail that could hurt us?" Claire's flash drive. Empty. Marcus smiled. "We found it weeks ago. Replaced everything. Your little protege ran away for nothing." They were closing in now, moving with the same predatory grace I remembered from my last moments. But I wasn't the same trusting victim anymore. "David," I called out. "Now." The lights went out. In the darkness, I heard the gallery door open, then multiple footsteps. When the lights came back on, we weren't alone. FBI agents filled the room, weapons drawn. David stood with them, looking grimly satisfied. "Art Crime Task Force," he said. "We've been building a case against you for months. You were undercover? Cora's shock was almost comical. The whole time, he moved to stand beside me. Though falling in love with Mira wasn't part of the plan, I squeezed his hand, then faced my killers. You're right. Claire's flash drive was a decoy. The real evidence came from your other victims. All the women you destroyed. All the partners you betrayed. They've been waiting years to testify. You can't prove anything, Marcus snarled. Actually, we can. I pulled out my phone, played back their confessions from moments ago, their admission of remembering me, of killing me in our past life. Inadmissible in court, maybe, but enough to make people dig deeper, to look harder at all those convenient accidents and suspicious deaths. Cora's mask cracked completely. You planned this, all of it. I learned from the best. I watched as the agents began reading them their rights. You taught me how to play the long game, remember? As they were led away, I heard Cora laugh. This isn't over, Sarah. Or Mira, or whatever you're calling yourself now. Some patterns can't be broken, but she was wrong. I'd already broken the pattern, by choosing justice over revenge, by letting love in when I'd planned only for vengeance, by becoming someone stronger than either Sarah or Mira alone. David wrapped his arm around me as we watched them being driven away. You okay? Better than okay. I leaned into him. Though we should probably talk about the whole undercover FBI agent thing. You should probably explain the whole reincarnated murder victim thing too. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in either lifetime. Over dinner? It's a date. He kissed me soft. And this time, no hidden agendas. Just us. Just us. I liked the sound of that. Elena and James had taught me about betrayal in both lives, but David had taught me something more important. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's living well, loving deeply, and leaving the past where it belongs. Behind us, through the gallery windows, the sun was rising over San Francisco Bay. A new day. A new life. And this time I was ready for whatever came next. The arrest of Cora Williams and Marcus Pierce should have been the end of it. The FBI had enough evidence to put them away for decades. The art fraud, the money laundering, the suspicious deaths of their former business partners. It should have been over. But something felt wrong. They were too calm in custody, too confident. Elena and James had never accepted defeat gracefully in either lifetime. When my phone rang at midnight, I wasn't surprised to hear David's voice. They made bail, he said without preamble. Someone pulled strings, provided ironclad alibis for the dates of the suspected murders. Half our evidence has been compromised. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. How? We don't know yet, but there's more. Cora's gallery records, all mysteriously corrupted. The witnesses we lined up, suddenly changing their stories or disappearing altogether. Of course, they'd had 30 years to build their network, their safety nets. I'd been a fool to think it would be that easy. Where are you? I asked. Outside your building. You need to pack a bag. We need to move you somewhere safe. Number. I was already pulling on clothes, but not to run. I'm done hiding from them. Tell me where they are. Mira, don't. They're dangerous. So am I. I grabbed my keys. Either help me or stay out of my way. He was waiting in his car, looking exhausted and worried. The gallery. They went straight there after making bail, but we can't touch them without new evidence. Then we'll get new evidence. I slid into the passenger seat. What they don't know is that I made copies of everything, hidden where even they won't think to look. The Hayes Gallery was dark when we arrived, but I could see movement inside. Through the glass front, I watched Elena and James moving through the space like shadows, checking their precious artwork. Stay here, I told David. Not a chance. He caught my arm. I'm not letting you face them alone, not again. Again. The word hung between us. How much do you remember? Pieces. His eyes were haunted. I was there that night, 30 years ago. I heard the screams but didn't understand what was happening. By the time I realized it was too late, memory hit me like a wave. David Laurent, the quiet art student who'd rented the studio apartment above my first gallery. The one who'd found my body but been too late to save me. You remember everything? Not at first, but being around you, watching you face them. It started coming back. He touched my face gently. I failed you then. I won't fail you now. Inside the gallery, Elena's laugh echoed off the walls. The same laugh I'd heard as I bled out on my kitchen floor. Something inside me snapped. I strode through the front door, David close behind. Elena and James turned at the sound, their new faces wearing familiar expressions of contemptuous amusement. Back for more? Elena's smile was razor sharp. You never did know when to give up, Sarah. My name is Mira now, and I'm not here to give up. I moved deeper into the gallery. I'm here to finish what you started 30 years ago. James circled to my left, trying to flank me. You're even more pathetic in this life than you were in the last one. At least then you had the dignity to die quietly. Quietly? I laughed. Is that how you remember it? Because I remember screaming. I remember begging you to think about our baby. I remember Elena watching, smiling as you stabbed me again and again. The past is past. Elena waved her hand dismissively. We've moved beyond all that. Built something bigger bigger than your small-minded revenge. Have you? I pulled out my phone. Because I've been monitoring your offshore accounts, the ones you thought were untraceable. Right now, every law enforcement agency in the world is getting detailed records of your activities. Every murder, every fraud, every betrayal. James lunged for me, but David was fast. They went down in a tangle of limbs, fighting for control. Elena used the distraction to pull a gun from her purse. Always so dramatic, she sighed, aiming at my heart. Always thinking you're smarter than us. Goodbye again, Sarah. The shot echoed through the gallery, but it wasn't Elena's gun that fired. She looked down in shock at the spreading red stain on her chest, then at Claire Pierce standing in the doorway, gun steady in her hands. "My name is Claire," she said calmly, "and I've been working undercover for Interpol for 2 years. You should have checked my background more carefully." James screamed in rage, breaking free from David to run to Elena, but she was already gone, her new life's blood pooling on the polished concrete floor just as mine had 30 years ago. "It's over, Marcus," Claire said. "The real evidence is already with the authorities. This time there's no escape." As sirens wailed in the distance, I watched James collapse beside Elena's body, his rage turning to broken sobs. Some patterns really do repeat, but not always in the ways we expect. David pulled me close as the police swarmed in. "Are you okay?" I touched the spot where the knife had entered in my past life, feeling only smooth skin and a steady heartbeat. "I will be." We have a lot to my forehead gently. "All the time in the world." Later, after the statements had been given and the gallery sealed as a crime scene, Claire explained everything. How Interpol had been building a case against Elena and James's international crime network for years. How they'd placed her as the perfect target, knowing James's type. How she'd recognized me as another victim and decided to trust me with the truth. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner," she said. "But we needed their guard down, needed them to think they'd won." "No apologies necessary." I hugged her tightly. "You did what I couldn't. You got justice." David drove me home as dawn broke over the city. Neither of us spoke until we reached my door. "What happens now?" he asked. I looked at him, this man who had carried the guilt of failing to save me for 30 years, who had chosen to stand beside me in this life without hesitation. Now we live, really live. No more looking back. Together? Together. I took his hand, feeling the calluses from his sculpture work, the strength that had always been there to catch me. Some patterns are worth repeating. Inside my apartment, I opened the safe and pulled out Sarah Chen's death certificate. The last piece of my past life. The last chain binding me to who I used to be. "Want to do the honors?" I handed it to David. He fed it into the shredder, then pulled me close. To new beginnings. Outside my window, San Francisco was waking up. Somewhere, James was facing justice in this life for crimes committed in 2. Elena had found the same end she'd given me, a symmetry I hadn't planned but couldn't regret. But here, in this moment, with David's arms around me and a future stretching out unmarred by the past, I finally felt free. Not Sarah, not just Mira, but someone entirely new. Someone ready to live without the weight of revenge. "I love you," I said softly. "I love you too." He kissed me deeply. "In this life, and any others that come after. Some stories end in blood, some in justice, but the best ones, I was learning, end in love. Not the desperate, clinging love I'd had with James, but something stronger. Something built on truth and trust, and the courage to begin again. This was my real second chance. Not for revenge, but for redemption. For the life Sarah Chen should have had, and the one Mira Shah was brave enough to choose. The investigation into Elena's death revealed darker secrets than even I had imagined. As Interpol and the FBI dug deeper into their criminal empire, bodies began surfacing. Literal bodies, buried in foundations of buildings James had developed, hidden in walls of galleries Elena had owned. 3 in Chicago, Claire reported, spreading crime scene photos across my dining room table. 2 in Seattle, all connected to their previous operations, all killed the same way. I studied the photos, feeling sick. The knife wounds were identical to mine from 30 years ago. They kept repeating it, kept killing the same way, like a signature. David squeezed my shoulder. "But it's what will convict him. The pattern is too specific to ignore." James sat in a maximum security cell, refusing to speak to anyone, but his silence spoke volume. The evidence Claire had gathered over 2 years working undercover was damning. The international art fraud scheme had been just the surface. Beneath it lay a network of murder, blackmail, and corruption spanning 3 decades. "We found something else," Claire said quietly, pulling out a final file. "Records from 1995. Your case, Sarah. They kept everything, photos, documents, even the knife." My hands shook as I opened the file. There it was in black and white. Sarah Chen's murder, documented in Elena's precise handwriting. Every detail, every moment preserved like a trophy. "She was proud of it," I whispered. "It was their first kill together, their beginning." David took the file from my trembling hand. "And now it will be their end. This proves premeditation, shows the pattern started with you." My phone buzzed. Curtis, my assistant, with news from the company board. They'd been understanding about my involvement in the case, but patience was wearing thin. I had a business to run, after all. I have to go, I said, standing. Board meeting in an hour. I'll drive you, David offered. No, stay with Claire. Go through the rest of the evidence. I need to handle this part alone. The board meeting was tense but productive. I laid out everything, explained my connection to the case, my role in bringing down an international crime ring. By the end, they were satisfied, even impressed. Mira Shah's reputation was intact, but leaving the office, I felt eyes on me. A prickling sensation at the back of my neck. I called David. Someone's watching me, I said quietly, walking faster. Following me from the office. Where are you? 2 blocks from the gallery. I can see someone in the reflection of the windows. Dark coat, moving like James used to move. Get inside somewhere public. I'm on my way. I ducked into a crowded coffee shop, but the feeling persisted. When I glanced out the window, I caught a glimpse of a familiar face. Not James, still locked in his cell, but someone who moved like him, smiled like him. His son, the one he'd had with his first wife, before Elena. The one who'd inherited his father's cold eyes and cruel smile. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Did you think he worked alone? Did you think it was over? Another body had been found, Claire reported an hour later. Fresh this time. A young woman who looked like me, killed the same way. The pattern continuing through a new generation. It's not over, I told David and Claire as we gathered in my apartment that night. James had a successor, someone to carry on their work. His son, Claire nodded. Michael Pierce. We investigated him but could never prove anything. He's careful, like his father, but not careful enough. I pulled up the security footage from my office building. He's watching me, wanting to finish what his father started. David's hands clenched into fists. I won't let that happen. Not again. No, I agreed. This time we end it. All of it. No more patterns, no more cycles of violence. We spent the night planning, going through everything we knew about Michael Pierce. His businesses, his connections, his weaknesses. He was his father's son in every way, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me, just like his father had 30 years ago. The next morning, I went to visit James in prison. He sat across from me in his orange jumpsuit, looking older and smaller than I remembered. Your son is continuing your work, I said without preamble. Did you teach him how to kill, or did he learn that on his own? A flicker of something crossed his face. Pride? Fear? Michael is his own man. He's a copy of you. Same methods, same victims, same arrogance. I leaned forward. But he's going to fail, just like you failed. And this time there won't be anyone to carry on the family tradition. You don't know my son. I knew you. In 2 lifetimes, I knew exactly what you were capable of, and I still won. I left him there, staring after me with those cold eyes that had watched me die. But I had what I needed. The confirmation that Michael was acting with his father's blessing. The proof that this wasn't over. Back in my office, I set the trap. A carefully leaked story about new evidence. A midnight meeting arranged at the Hayes Gallery. Michael Pierce took the bait exactly as his father would have. But when he arrived at the gallery that night, expecting to find me alone and vulnerable, he found something else entirely. Claire with her Interpol team, David with the FBI art crime unit, and me standing in the spot where his father's lover had died, wearing a wire and a bulletproof vest. It ends here, I told him as the agents moved in. The pattern stops with you. He fought, of course, violently, desperately with his father's rage. But in the end, he fell just like Elena had, just like James had. The Pierce family legacy of blood and betrayal finally broken. Later, holding David in the quiet of my apartment, I felt the last pieces of Sarah Chen's story settling into place. The justice she'd died without, the peace she'd never found, finally achieved through Mira Shah's strength. What now? David asked softly. I looked out at the city lights, at the future stretching out before us. Now we live. No more looking back, no more patterns to break, just us moving forward. His arms tightened around me. Together? Together. I turned to kiss him, feeling only the present moment, only this life, only love, always together. Elena's death and James's imprisonment should have brought me peace. Instead, it brought chaos. The morning after Michael Pierce's arrest, my carefully constructed world began to crumble. The board wants to distance the company from the scandal, Curtis reported, his usual calm demeanor shaken. They're calling for your resignation. I sat in my office, watching the news coverage on mute. My face was everywhere, linked to murder investigations spanning 3 decades. The mysterious Mira Shah, tech CEO turned vigilante, who helped bring down an international crime ring. That's not all, Curtis continued. Someone leaked details about Sarah Chen's murder. The press is digging into your connection. Elena's meticulous records had ensured that. Her final revenge from beyond the grave. My phone lit up with a text from David. Turn on channel 7. I unmuted the television just in time to hear the reporter say, sources close to the investigation suggest Mira Shah may have had prior knowledge of the murder. Questions are being raised about her involvement in the criminal enterprise she helped expose. The evidence Elena had kept of my murder was being twisted, used to paint me as an accomplice rather than a victim. The pattern she'd documented so carefully now seemed to implicate me in their crimes. Curtis, cancel my meetings. All of them. I grabbed my coat. And get our legal team on the phone. David was waiting outside with his car running. Claire's been trying to reach you. The FBI is reopening cases based on Elena's records. They want to question you. About what? My own murder. I buckled my seatbelt as he pulled away from the curb. Where are we going? Somewhere safe. My studio. The press hasn't found it yet. His workspace was cold and quiet, the unfinished sculptures looming like ghosts in the dim light. I sank onto his workbench, suddenly exhausted. They're going to destroy everything I built, I said. Elena knew exactly what those records would do. She made sure I'd lose everything even if she died. David knelt in front of me. You haven't lost everything. You have me. You have the truth. The truth? I laughed bitterly. The truth is, I'm a reincarnated murder victim who spent 2 lifetimes seeking revenge. Try explaining that to the board of directors. My phone buzzed again. Claire this time. The FBI found something in Elena's paper. Love letters between her and James dating back to before your marriage. They detail everything they planned, including your murder. It proves you were the victim, not an accomplice. Hope flared briefly, then died. It won't matter. The damage is already done. Then we fight back, David said firmly. We tell your story, the whole story. No one will believe it. They don't have to believe in reincarnation, they just have to believe in justice. Claire arrived an hour later with boxes of documents. Elena kept everything, every scheme, every crime, every victim. She was building a record of their legacy. We spread the papers across David's work tables. 30 years of meticulous documentation. Bank records, photographs, letters. The story of 2 sociopaths in love, written in blood and betrayal. Look at this. Claire pointed to a series of dates. The murders weren't random. They followed a pattern based on your death date. Every victim was killed on significant anniversary. I studied the timeline. They were recreating my murder over and over. It proves they were obsessed with you, David said. Not the other way around. We can use this. My phone buzzed with another news alert. The board had called an emergency meeting. My resignation would be demanded in the morning. Let them have the company, I said suddenly. Let them have all of it. David looked up sharply. What are you planning? Elena wanted to destroy Mira Shah? Fine. Let her win that battle. But Sarah Chen's story needs to be told. We worked through the night, organizing the evidence. Every document, every photograph, every piece of Elena's obsessive record-keeping was arranged to tell the true story. Not just of my murder, but of every life they'd destroyed in the 30 years since. The next morning, I walked into the board meeting with my head high. I'm resigning, I announced before they could speak. But first, you need to see this. I laid out Elena's record, the love letters, the murder documentation, the pattern of deaths that followed, the proof that I had been a target, not an accomplice. Miss Shah, the board chairman said slowly, are you saying you knew about these crimes? I knew what they were capable of. I helped bring them to justice, and now I'm walking away with my conscience clear. Outside the boardroom, David was waiting. Are you sure about this? More sure than I've ever been. I took his hand. Mira Shah's life was built on revenge. I want to build something new, something better. Claire met us at the gallery that evening. The space was dark and empty. Elena's precious artwork gone, replaced by evidence markers and crime scene tape. The FBI is officially closing the case, she reported. Between Elena's records and Michael's confession, they have everything they need. I walked to the spot where Elena had died, where her blood had stained the concrete. It's really over. Not quite. David pulled me close. There's still one more thing we need to do. He led me to his studio, where his sculpture for the gallery stood complete. But it wasn't the same piece I remembered. He had transformed it, turning the twisted metal and broken glass into something new, something beautiful. I call it resurrection, he said softly. It's your story, both of them. I touched the smooth surfaces, feeling the strength beneath the delicate exterior. This was my legacy. Not revenge, not destruction, but transformation. What happens now? Claire asked. I looked at David, at the life we could build together. Now we write a new story, one without patterns or cycles or revenge. Together, he promised, pulling me close. My phone buzzed one last time. A final news alert about Mira Shah's resignation, about the evidence that cleared her name, about the truth finally coming to light. But I didn't need to read it. I knew who I was now. Not Sarah Chen, the victim. Not Mira Shah, the avenger. Someone new, someone whole, someone ready to live. The truth spilled out of me like water from a broken dam. David and I sat in his studio, surrounded by his sculptures, as I told him everything. Not just about my death as Sarah Chen, but about the life before it. The trust I'd given so freely to Elena and James. The baby I'd lost. The years of watching them in this new life, planning my revenge. I should have told you sooner, I said, watching his face carefully. But how do you tell someone you're a reincarnated murder victim? David's hands were steady as he worked clay, shaping something new while he listened. I knew there was more to your story. The way you looked at them, like you could see right through their new faces to who they really were. You believe me? He set down his tools and took my hands in his clay-covered ones. I believe in you, and honestly it explains a lot. The evidence you somehow knew to look for, the patterns you recognized, the way you knew exactly how they would react. Relief flooded through me. I was so afraid you'd think I was crazy. After everything we've seen, the synchronized murders, Elena's obsessive documentation, James recreating your death over and over, he shook his head. Your explanation makes more sense than anything else. I looked around his studio at the half-finished pieces that seemed to watch us like silent witnesses. There's more. That night, 30 years ago, you were there. His hands tightened on mine. What? You lived above my first gallery. You heard the screams but didn't understand what was happening until it was too late. I touched his face gently. You've been carrying that guilt for 2 lifetimes. Recognition flickered in his eyes. The nightmares. I've always had these dreams about finding a woman in a red dress, blood everywhere, but I couldn't save her. Not dreams, memories. He pulled me close, his heartbeat steady against my ear. That's why I felt drawn to you from the moment we met, why I knew I had to protect you this time. You did protect me. You helped me get justice instead of revenge. Justice isn't finished yet. He stood, pulling me to my feet. There's something you need to see. The sculpture he'd been working on wasn't just any piece. It was us, 30 years ago. Me in my red dress, him reaching out too late to save me. But he'd transformed the moment of tragedy into something else. The figures were intertwined, rising from broken pieces into a new whole. I call it second chances, he said softly. It's not just about what happened then, it's about now, about choosing love over vengeance. Tears blurred my vision. It's perfect. There's more. He led me to another piece, still unfinished. This one's about who we are now, who we choose to be. The new sculpture showed 2 figures, not falling, but rising, not breaking, but becoming stronger, not victims or avengers, but survivor. I love you, I said, the words feeling both familiar and brand new, in this life, and the last one and any others that come after. He kissed me then, tasting of clay and truth and possibility. When we broke apart, he pressed something into my hand, a small clay figure, still warm from his hand. What's this? The future if you want it. I looked closer. The figure was a child, formed with his artist's precision but radiating joy. A second chance at the life that had been stolen from me. Are you asking what I think you're asking? He smiled. That gentle smile that had drawn me in from the beginning. I'm asking if you want to build something new, something that isn't about the past or revenge or patterns repeating, just us, moving forward, creating instead of destroying. Yes, I whispered, clutching the small figure. Yes, to all of it. My phone buzzed. Reality intruding. Claire needed us at the FBI office to go over final statements. The case wasn't quite closed. The paperwork since I'd awakened with Sarah Chen's memory. I didn't feel driven by the past. Elena was dead. James was in prison. Their patterns of destruction had been broken. And here, in this studio full of beautiful things made from broken pieces, I had found something I never expected. Not just love or justice or peace, but the chance to truly live again. We should go, David said, reading the message over my shoulder. Get the last details sorted out. I set the clay figure carefully on his workbench. Will you tell me about your nightmares now? All of them? Only if you tell me everything about your past life. The good parts too, not just the tragedy. Deal. I took his hand, feeling the strength and gentleness there. But first, we have one last bit of justice to serve. He grabbed his keys, understanding in his eyes. Together, together. I looked back at the sculptures, at the story they told of death and rebirth, tragedy and triumph, revenge transformed into love, always together. The sun was setting as we left the studio, painting San Francisco in shades of gold and promise. Somewhere in the city, Claire waited with the final pieces of evidence that would close this chapter forever. But my story, our story, was just beginning, and this time I was ready to write it right. The Hayes Gallery opening was packed for David's exhibition. Art critics, collectors, and media filled the space where Elena had died, where James had been arrested, where everything had changed. His sculptures told our story in steel and glass, though only we knew the full truth behind them. I wore white this time, not red. No more blood, no more death. David stood beside me as we greeted guests, his hand steady on my back. The centerpiece of the show dominated the main space, rising from floor to ceiling in twisted metal and fractured light. "It's extraordinary," a critic gushed. "The transformation of pain into beauty, death into rebirth. What inspired it?" David squeezed my hand. "Someone very special. Someone who taught me about second chances." The gallery buzzed with conversation and champagne. Claire moved through the crowd in her Interpol capacity, watching for any sign of Michael Pierce's supporters. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Let them come. I was done running from shadows. "Miss Shaw?" A young reporter approached, notebook in hand. "Would you comment on the connection between these pieces and the recent arrest?" Before I could answer, a commotion erupted near the entrance. James Pierce was being led in, handcuffed, flanked by FBI agents, part of his plea deal arranged by Claire. He had to face the evidence of his crimes publicly. The room fell silent as he shuffled through the space, orange jumpsuit stark against the elegant crowd. His eyes found mine, cold as ever but somehow diminished. "Tell them," Claire commanded. "Tell them what really happened 30 years ago." James looked at David's sculptures, at the story of violence and redemption carved in metal and glass. For the first time I saw something like understanding in his face. "I killed her," he said, voice carrying in the quiet room. "Sarah Chen, my wife. Elena and I planned it together. We killed her, and our unborn child." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed. The reporter scribbled frantically. "But that wasn't enough," James continued, the words dragging out of him. "We kept killing, the same way, over and over. Elena documented everything. She was proud of it, proud of our pattern." I stepped forward, my white dress ghost-like in the gallery light. Why did you keep repeating it?" He looked at me, really looked at me, and I knew he saw both women I had been. "Because we couldn't recreate the perfect moment, that first kill. The way you looked at me with such betrayal, such love even as you died. We chased that feeling for 30 years. And now?" David asked, his voice hard. "Now I see what we really were, what we did." James gestured at the sculptures with his cuffed hands. "You turned our destruction into something beautiful. That's a revenge we never considered possible." The agents led him away, but his confession hung in the air. The reporter turned back to me, eyes wide. "Miss Shaw, did you know? When you invested in the gallery, when you helped expose their crimes, did you know about Sarah Chen?" I met David's eyes, saw the love and strength there. I knew everything, and I chose justice over vengeance, creation over destruction. The crowd pressed closer, questions overlapping. But I wasn't finished. Elena Williams and James Pierce spent 30 years recreating a murder, building a legacy of pain. But look around you. Look at what their violence has been transformed into. Art, beauty, truth. I gestured to David's sculptures, to the story they told. They thought patterns could only repeat. That tragedy was the only ending possible. They were wrong. The exhibition became a sensation. Critics hailed it as a triumph of transformation, a testament to the power of art to heal. Only David and I knew the full truth, the real story behind each piece. Later that night, after the crowds had gone, we stood alone in the gallery. The space where Elena had died, where James had confessed, where our past and present had finally merged into something new. "Are you okay?" David asked softly. I touched the sculpture that told the story of my death, feeling the smooth metal under my fingers. "Better than okay. For the first time in either life, I'm free." He pulled me close. Our reflection multiplied in the fractured glass of his art. "What happens now?" "Now we live." I turned to face him. "No more looking back. No more patterns to break. Just us? Just us." I kissed him, there in the space where so much had ended and begun, and whatever we choose to create together. Outside, San Francisco glittered with possibility. Elena's obsessive records had become evidence of her own madness. James's confession had closed the last open wounds. Even Michael Pierce's threats seemed hollow now, faced with the truth transformed into art. I wasn't Sarah Chen anymore, the trusting wife who died in betrayal. I wasn't just Mira Shah, the avenger seeking justice. I was something new, something whole, someone ready to live fully in this second chance at life. David took my hand as we left the gallery. "Home? Home." I looked back one last time at his sculptures, at our story told in steel and light, to our future. The night wrapped around us like a promise as we walked away from the past, toward whatever came next, together, exactly as we were meant to be. Justice came swiftly after James's public confession. The international courts moved with unprecedented speed, processing the mountain of evidence Elena had left behind. I watched from the gallery as the sentences were handed down, one after another. James Pierce, life imprisonment without possibility of parole, multiple counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy, fraud. The judge cited his confession at David's exhibition as evidence of his complete lack of remorse. Michael Pierce, 25 years for conspiracy and attempted murder. His father's face twisted with something like pride as the sentence was read. The pattern would end with him, locked away before he could fully follow in his father's footsteps. Claire sat beside me through the proceedings, her Interpol badge gleaming. "We found 3 more bodies," she whispered. "Cold cases from the 90s, all killed the same way." I gripped David's hand as the final victim count was read. 17 women over 30 years. Each one chosen to recreate my murder, each one documented in Elena's meticulous records. The prosecution calls Mira Shah to deliver her victim impact statement. I stood, my white suit stark against the wooden courtroom. James watched me approach the stand, his eyes searching for traces of Sarah Chen in my face. 30 years ago, Elena Williams and James Pierce murdered Sarah Chen and her unborn child, I began. They spent the next 3 decades recreating that murder, building a legacy of pain and betrayal. I helped expose their crimes not for revenge, but to break that pattern of destruction. The courtroom was silent as I spoke about the women they had killed, the lives they had destroyed, about the evidence Elena had kept, the obsession that had driven them to keep killing. Their violence has been transformed into something else now, I concluded, into art that tells the truth about survival and justice. They wanted to create a legacy of death. Instead, they taught us about the power of breaking patterns, of choosing life over vengeance. James never looked away as I spoke. When I finished, he stood despite his lawyer's attempt to stop him. "I see you now," he said. "Both of you. What we killed, what came back stronger." The judge ordered him to sit, but the words lingered. He knew. He finally understood what his obsession with recreating my murder had created instead. After the sentencing, David drove us to his studio. The space had been transformed, filled with new pieces commissioned after the exhibition. Art born from truth, from justice, from love. "The gallery called," he said as we entered. "They want to make the transformation series permanent, a testament to breaking patterns of violence." I touched the sculpture that told the story of my death and rebirth. "What did you tell them?" "That we needed to discuss it. It's your story too." "Number?" I turned to face him. "It's our story now, what we built together from the broken pieces." His hands still dusty from working with clay. Speaking of building things together, the small clay figure of a child still sat on his workbench, waiting. Beside it now stood another piece, 2 figures intertwined, creating rather than destroying. "I thought we could start here," he said softly, "building something new." I picked up the child figure, feeling its warm solidity. "A family? If you want. No more patterns of the past, just us, moving forward." My hand drifted to my stomach, remembering the child I had lost. But this wasn't about replacing what was taken. This was about creating something entirely new. "Yes," I whispered, 1,000 times. "Yes." Claire brought the final paperwork the next day. Death certificates for all 17 victims, including Sarah Chen. Evidence files marked closed. Justice served at last. "Michael Pierce tried to make a deal," she reported. "Offered to expose more of his father's crimes in exchange for a reduced sentence. Let him keep his secrets," I said. "The pattern ends here." We gathered in the studio that evening, Claire and David and me. 3 people brought together by a 30-year quest for justice, now bound by something stronger than vengeance. To breaking patterns, Claire raised her glass. "To new beginnings," David added. I looked at them, my chosen family, and felt the last pieces of Sarah Chen's story settling into peace. To life. Outside, San Francisco sparkled with spring rain. Somewhere in a maximum security prison, James Pierce sat with the knowledge of what his obsession had created. Somewhere in the city morgue, Elena's body lay with her precious record, her documentation of death transformed into evidence of life prevailing. But here in this studio, surrounded by art that told the truth about survival and love, I was finally, completely free, ready to create rather than destroy, ready to build a future untainted by the past. David's hands found mine. Strong and gentle and sure. Claire smiled, understanding in her eyes. Together we had broken the pattern. Together we would write a new story. My phone buzzed with a message from the gallery. Another commission, another chance to tell the truth through art. But that could wait. Right now, all that mattered was this moment, this peace, this love, this second chance at living fully, completely, without the weight of revenge. 1 year after Elena's death and James's imprisonment, I stood in front of Sarah Chen's grave. The headstone was weathered now, the dates marking a life cut tragically short. But I wasn't here to mourn anymore. David waited by the car, giving me this moment alone. In my hands, I held the last of Elena's record, the detailed account of my murder that had haunted 2 lifetimes. "I forgive you," I said softly to the grave. "Not them, never them. But I forgive you for trusting too much, for loving too blindly, for dying with hate in your heart instead of peace. I placed Elena's papers on the grave and lit them, watching as the flames consumed the last physical evidence of that night 30 years ago. The smoke carried away the final threads binding me to Sarah Chen's tragedy. When I returned to the car, David pulled me close. Ready? More than ready. We drove to the hospital in comfortable silence. Claire was already there, pacing the waiting room with barely contained excitement. They just finished the ultrasound, she reported. Everything looks perfect. My hand drifted to my swollen belly, feeling our daughter kick. 6 months along, just like I had been when I died in my past life. But this time, surrounded by love instead of betrayal, the future held only promise. The gallery called, David said as we left the hospital. The Transformation series is being featured in New York next month. They want to know if we'll attend. I thought about our story, told in steel and glass for the world to see, about justice and healing and love born from the ashes of revenge. Yes, I decided. But first, we have something more important to do. The prison visiting room was cold and sterile. James sat across from us, orange jumpsuit bright against the gray walls. Age and confinement had stripped away his arrogance, leaving only a hollow shell of the man who had killed me. "Why are you here?" he asked. "To show you what you failed to destroy?" I placed the ultrasound photo on the table. "Life finds a way, James. Love finds a way." He stared at the image, recognition and regret washing over his face. A daughter? A new beginning. The pattern ends with us. No more death, no more revenge. Elena would have hated this, he said softly. She never understood that love could be stronger than destruction. That's why she lost. I stood, David's hand steady on my back. "Goodbye, James. We won't be back." Outside the prison, the California sun was warm and bright. Claire waited with lunch reservations and news about Michael Pierce's failed appeal. But that life, that story, felt distant now. "Where to?" David asked as we got in the car. "Home." I touched my belly, feeling our daughter move to our future. The studio had become our sanctuary. David's sculptures told new stories now, of creation instead of destruction, of love transcending time and trauma. The piece he had made of our past life stood in one corner, a reminder of how far we had come. "I have something for you," he said, leading me to his workbench. A new sculpture stood there, small but perfect. 2 figures holding a child, their forms flowing together in an endless circle of love and protection. "For the nursery," he explained, "so she'll always know she comes from love, not hate, from healing, not harm." Tears blurred my vision as I touched the smooth metal. "It's perfect." Claire arrived with dinner and plans for the New York exhibition. We sat in the studio's warm light, talking about art and justice and family, about the future instead of the past. My phone buzzed with a message from Curtis. The tech company I had left behind was thriving under new leadership. Another piece of Mira Shah's old life settled into place. "Any regrets?" David asked later as we lay in bed watching the fog roll in over the bay. "Not anymore." I guided his hand to where our daughter kicked. "This is exactly where we're meant to be." In the morning, I would help Claire close the last of the cold cases Elena had documented. We would continue transforming stories of violence into art that healed. David would create beauty from broken things. But for now, in this moment, I was simply alive, completely present, deeply loved. Sarah Chen had died believing in the power of destruction. Mira Shah had lived seeking justice through revenge. But the woman I had become, the life we had built together, proved something stronger. Love breaks all patterns. Life finds a way. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get a second chance to write your own ending. Our daughter kicked again, strong and sure. Outside, the city hummed with possibility. And in my heart, 2 lifetimes of pain finally transformed into perfect peace.